So I saw where Mike McGlinchey, the new right tackle, former Niner, good tackle, not great, not Tristan Wirfs, but a good tackle, good right tackle, not Lane Johnson. But I saw where McGlinchey said, okay, I changed my mind. I didn't like Russ. And now I watched his work ethic. I'm into Russ. And it is weird when he left. Brady leaves New England, 20 years there. You would have thought he would have offended somebody, an executive, a sales guy, a player, a coach, a trainer. Everybody loved him, tears flowing. Russ is there a third of the time, leaves Seattle and gets dogged by everybody, former teammates. Do you think it's just as simple as people view him as inauthentic?
I think that plays a part. I think they were a defensive-led team. I think the individual instances that happened in the Super Bowl, right, with Marshawn Lynch, everything that hovered around that, I think without that, let's just say they win it. I don't know if it quite gets as, it got pretty negative. I do think people think he's kind of a weird guy. And I would say this, quarterbacks, you got a lot of theories on quarterbacks. You go back to junior high. They're usually kind of the lead dog. Everyone follows them. And then by the time you get to high school, they're getting girls, better looking. Maybe they get into college. They get good jobs. If they're not able to play professional football, they just feel like the leader of the crew. And that's not always fair because just because you play quarterback doesn't mean you have leadership traits. And I think Russell really always tried to embrace that, right? He really wanted it, which I respect. But I don't think you can fake it if you don't have it all. And it's really hard, right? Like Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, those guys are kind of outliers. Patrick Mahomes, right? They got it all. Steph Curry. The character, the focus, the talent. Everyone likes them. They want to hang with them. It's most, Rodgers, all-time great player, but, rubs people the wrong way sometimes. And, has been very hit or miss over his career as a leader. I also think just any time that you play bad and the way that, it was Pete versus Russ, and I know where you stood. I was with you. I thought I'd probably bet on Russ. How's Seattle going to win this trade? And it takes time, but I would say they're definitely in the lead right now. When you factor in the picks, when you factor in the cap relief, when you factor in how much success they had last year. Geno Smith, just in a vacuum, had a better season than Russell Wilson. How crazy is that when you really say that out loud?
When Russ came out of the draft, that was in your scouting days or around that time when you were a scout in the NFL. Do you remember Russell Wilson's draft profile very well?
Yeah, he was beloved. I remember a story from one of our scouts that went through Wisconsin, right? And that when they do the measuring, now these players don't even do half the things at a pro day, right? But he back at just 10 years ago, everyone did everything. And when he was getting measured, I think, he was a shade under, it started with 5'10" something. And then they're like, and they said 5'11" flat, and every scout applauded because everyone in the room was rooting for him. And with the Eagles, it's been well documented over the years. Daniel Jeremiah loved him. Andy loved him. Howie loved him. And I think I saw a recent article about Howie talking about Jalen Hurts and looking back when they got cute with Russell Wilson. And when you like a guy at that position, why try to get an extra pick and get a guy in the third round when you can just take him in the second round? And look what happened to the Eagles. Same type deal. Most people, including myself, thought Jalen Hurts in the second round. That's insane. You probably could have got the guy in the fourth. Well, I would say they don't regret doing it. And Russell, he was really kind of a trendsetter, right? I remember being younger and Doug Flutie. There weren't short quarterbacks, especially mobile short quarterbacks. So his time, whether he's washed now, I will say this, and I've been to several Seattle Niner games live. I think he's one of the most remarkable players I've ever seen in his heyday. He had some Steve Young. It was unreal. Now, the guy we saw last year, we're about to find out, was it all Nate Hackett, or can Sean resurrect him? Or sometimes I think we've kind of become numb, right? Everyone has a long 20-year shelf life. Well, some guys just peak out for 12 years. That's a pretty long career. That used to be the norm, right, Colin?
Yeah, and when I watched Russell, the thing that struck me is that he was still very effective running. He just stopped doing it. Now, he would get into late game situations when Nathaniel Hackett was the coach, and he would take off once or twice, and he was still very effective. I think when he got the big money, I'm gonna theorize this. When he got the big money, And I'm talking, his contract was Mahomes-ish, Peyton Manning-ish, right?
Yeah.
When he got that big money. I think Russell said to himself, okay, this has been reserved for guys that sit in the pocket. I'm not gonna be run around Russ anymore. I want to prove I can do it from the pocket. And I really felt that he wanted to sort of pivot to a older, in the pocket, can win at the line of scrimmage quarterback. When in truth, he's the same size mostly as Tua, who has acknowledged publicly, there are times I can't see over the offensive lineman. So I think Russ got stubborn. I talked to somebody who had looked at film of Russ, and they're like, sometimes he looked stubborn. Is that there's much better angles, slide in the pocket. Russ kind of felt like, this is my take. He kind of wanted to prove, okay, this is a contract that's been for the great pocket passers of all time. I'm not going to be wild, crazy, run around Russ. And then when Peyton got there, you've noticed he's lost weight this offseason. I think Peyton said, Russ, if Drew Brees could have run, he would have run. It's an asset. Lean into it.
Well, think about all the great running quarterbacks probably post the 1970s. Yeah, I don't consider like John Elway, even though he's mobile, or Aaron Rodgers, a running quarterback. I think Steve Young beat the drum the hardest. You have to win within the pocket, and he was a better athlete than even those guys, right? But he became a Hall of Famer and MVP ultimately with his arm. And I think historically would say that's how you have to transition, because the Mike Vicks, we'll see with Lamar, you just take a pounding. Kyler Murray, it's hard when you are kind of this hybrid running back. Now, you could argue maybe the rules a little safer to run. Guys are less likely to go Steve Atwater, John Lynch on your body down the field. I do think you can incorporate it if you do it right better than ever. Like Steve Young could not have done that. He would not have lasted as long as he did if he kept taking off like Russell did most of his career. I just think that, and sometimes in life, listen, it's happened to probably most humans, not at the level in which Russell, because he's such a public figure, but you get humbled in life. You really got two options, right? You kind of go back to the drawing board, because he's always been chasing greatness and trying to be like a top 15, 20 quarterback of all time and be a Hall of Fame guy, which he probably already is. But I just mean, right, is he just going to be a laughingstock moving forward? Or is he a prideful guy that we saw forever and that butted heads with some of those defensive guys and wanted to be a star? He's definitely one of the most fascinating stories in the league when you factor in his, the coach edition, right?
I want to go into Trey Lance. You know the Niners well. So when stuff gets out, it's because somebody wants it out. And it was recently where the story got out that there was no market for Trey Lance. So I had said on this podcast multiple times, I was told last year the Niners, not that they panicked, but really came to the conclusion that he's completing about 55% of his throws, career starts, and I was told by somebody in the organization, practice to practice, he was all over the map.
Oh, and they panicked because they re-signed Jimmy Garoppolo before the season started. So they were on edge.
So do you remember the first time when Trey Lance got there? Because he was raw, like Josh Allen. Do you remember the first time you saw him because you went to practices, or you heard things and thought, oh shit, this isn't going to work?
Yeah, I think the first time whenever you see a young player, especially a quarterback who's quote unquote raw from a smaller school that you don't have experience watching, right? It'd be one thing if you showed up to a Carolina Panthers practice, you've seen Bryce Young play a lot, or CJ Stroud. You can go on YouTube, but it's not the same as over a period of years watching a guy at one of the main programs. So the first year, I didn't really have any hard take one way or the other, but I know the head coach and I know the way they operate. It's about, they're not looking for Patrick Mahomes miracles in the offense. They're looking, in a weird, this sounds crazy, but somewhat dinking and dunking to their guys within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage and let them eat, right? They got some of the best yak guys from Debo and Kittle, and Ayuk's really good. Now McCaffrey. So he hasn't been accurate through his first 2 years. Now he's definitely improved his motion a little bit, but you could argue that's like a guy in Major League Baseball or a golfer. It's one thing to do it in a practice environment. It's another thing when the live bullets come, and usually you resort back to muscle memory. And that to me is the major question. But because the guy he's battling, he's the simple reality, he's battling to be the backup. He's no longer the starter 2 years. And I actually think it speaks to the NFL that the amount of money that's in the league right now, especially with the way they cap the rookie deals. So remember back in the day, like Matt Stafford and Sam Bradford and Dominican Sue were getting more money than 99% of the players already in the league. Now, he got $30 million guaranteed, and they missed some picks, but whatever. They've been going to the NFC Championship. You're not as beholden to hold on for dear life. You're more likely to be, like Al Davis kind of had a quick trigger finger, which at the time seemed kind of crazy, but now you see it around the league, like Zach Wilson. He could be not on the Jets in a year, and it wouldn't even feel that weird. Trey Lance, I don't think he's guaranteed to be on the team week one, because it could be a situation where other teams need quarterback. Sam Darnold's your two. They got Brandon Allen, who was the backup for Joe Burrow the last couple of years. So he knows what it's like to be a backup, and he fits in that system. Again, they are not looking. I've been around Andy Reid. Likes a little pizzazz, likes some explosion. Kyle wants to run it about 30 times a game, do some, some quick screens, some slant routes, maybe a shot to Kittle, but it's a design shot. So their offense is somewhat of a throwback in this quote unquote modern, throw it all over the yard game.
Let's talk about old school, as you noted. So Dalvin Cook is saying he has multiple offers: Jets, Broncos, Patriots, Dolphins. Dolphins apparently using the Rams Swiss bank from a couple of years ago when they signed everybody.
No state income tax.
Are you surprised that there really hasn't been much of a market, even for D-Hop, who I still consider on the middle and bottom half of the league a 1, maybe a 2 on a really good roster? I always liked Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I like DeAndre Hopkins too. Part of it's just economics. At this point in time on June 27th, no one is going to give a guy a multi-year contract at the money they're asking. Now, come a couple weeks into training camp when the pads have been on and these good teams go, God, our running backs stink. Or maybe Coach Reed goes, God, our wide receivers aren't taking the jump we thought they were taking, because it's going to be the good teams are more willing to give you, that fake multi-year deal, but give you a big salary. Right now, there's no incentive. Spirits are high. You talk to these guys at different OTAs. Everyone's happy. You're working, 9 to 3 and 4-day work weeks. Once training camp, it gets a little tighter because you're really evaluating your team. Pads come on. You have a young guy. A lot of these teams, and it's human nature, right? You've made these draft picks in the last couple of years in the first or second round. Well, maybe the guy wasn't ready to play, or maybe he's been behind a guy that left in free agency, and now it's kind of his time. And ideally, that guy just becomes your starter. Maybe he's not as good as DeAndre Hopkins, but if he can get you, we think this guy can get us 60, 70 catches at $900,000, you'd rather do that to kind of big picture build your team. But when that guy can't catch a cold in training camp, or maybe gets hurt, things change fast. So both those guys, to me, have signing first couple weeks of August written all over them after an injury or after young players kind of not ascending, because everyone's got their fingers crossed that the guys they drafted are going to be good, and then the actual football happens and they're not as good as you hoped.
So one of the things I love about sports, for me to sit down and just watch regular season NBA or regular season baseball games, it's I'll watch bits and pieces. You can YouTube it. I can watch edited versions of games. NFL's different. College football's different. A UFC fight's different. There's urgency. But what I really like about sports is the cultural pivots and changes. I think the NBA is getting more international, and the size, we're kind of getting a throwback to size. The league got so fast, small, and perimeter-oriented. Teams like Denver, like Porter, Gordon, Jokic, like big.
You see that picture of Wembanyama dunking with his feet basically on the ground? Is that Manute Bol style level length?
So Brook Lopez, Giannis, just big. Porzingis to the Celtics. Phoenix has length. They're going to keep Ayton and KD. So, the league, cyclical, got small and fast with the Warriors, and people try to copy them. And now it's like, no, we're going the other way. We're getting big international. The other thing I'm noticing in the NFL, and I think Kansas City's on the forefront of this, is that it's always been understood in the NFL, John, that if you have a star quarterback, then, don't go first, second round for running backs like Kansas City did and kind of missed. You can have kind of pedestrian running backs if you have a great quarterback.
Totally agree.
Brady mostly had pedestrian quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So Kansas City did something last year, and because they won a Super Bowl, I feel like the Rams are trying to copy them. So basically, Kansas City, it looks like they gave up a very good corner to the Niners. And what they basically said is, we're going to spend our money on offense because younger players can struggle on offense because offense is choreography. But young players defensively, you just get them to cover and blow shit up. Yeah. So they went super young. So we'll keep Chris Jones. will pay for an elite front 4, front 5 guy. Aaron Donald, Rams. We'll let Bobby Wagner go. We'll let Jalen Ramsey go. And the Rams this draft just went fast with perimeter edge rushers. Last year it was corners. So the Rams basically saying, we're going to spend money probably on a Stafford, Noteboom to left tackle, Cooper Kupp. They may have to spend on Cam Akers, Jefferson. My theory is what the Chiefs have said is if you've got a really good quarterback, top 10 guy, you need an elite defensive lineman. Those are disruptors. Everybody else, even good corners, Kansas City, LA, let them go. And just get young, cheap, and fast on defense. And maybe I'm overstating it, but I watched the Rams' last 2 drafts, and they've really just said, we're not paying for anybody outside of Aaron Donald on this defense.
They had thrown a lot of money around so that it was tied. The one pushback I would have is, I hear what you're saying. You're factually correct. Is they are very, very tied now the way they're built to their quarterback once they kind of pivoted and then gave Stafford the money. And was he injured? The elbow, he was horrendous last year. Now even the year they won the Super Bowl, remember he had that stretch like 5 or 6 games where he was throwing pick sixes, not even just picks.
Right.
He throws interceptions, but he's such an explosive player. My question, I think we've talked about this before, is McVay, who clearly is established, he's a good coach. I mean, really good coach, right? But he has turned on some guys, younger players or veteran players or guys they've signed really quickly. Little John Gruden. And the rumors, you worked a lot of guys probably at that old network with former players that had been around Gruden. They're like, God, one day he's this, the next day he's this. And McVay, they loved Allen Robinson. They gave him all the money, and then a year later he hates him. They love Todd Gurley. Now that's, you could argue, just a young coach, awesome player, probably shouldn't have signed a running back. They regretted that one pretty quickly, but he's shown an inclination to just pivot really fast in a negative way on guys. And look at the running back. He had turned on him, and now he's a starting running back again, where I would say this, Kyle is a little bit more of an old soul, and Pete's pretty good at this. Like they've kind of had a long rope with a lot of guys. It's easy to always love Aaron Donald or even just kind of, back Matt Stafford. To me, it's the young guys are just going to be up and down, and you kind of have to, it's one of Coach Reid's great strengths. He's very, obviously he will move on from a guy, cut him or trade him, but he is patient. And I understand Sean's, 38 years old. He's rich. He's ready to roll, but that's one thing to keep an eye on. Can he have, if he's in it for the long haul, which I think is also a question. I mean, is he going to be coaching 5 more years? Or is it gonna the TV thing every single year? Because let's say this year they have a bad year, right? Because they're an injury or 2 away now. They're so top heavy. If Stafford's elbows messed up and Stetson Bennett would be their starter. Well, let's just hypothetically say they win 6 or 7 games. We saw he does not handle losing well. I think a little like Gruden. They run so hot. They get to the office at the crack of dawn while every normal human, even high achievers, are asleep. Is that sustainable? I see his wife's pregnant. Is this a guy? If you had to bet over under 3.5 years, is Sean McVay still the coach of the Rams?
I say he'd stay, but I don't think he's a lifer. I go back to my theory. So Cincinnati, Zach Taylor is off the Sean McVay tree. They bailed on some high-priced defensive guys this year. They just said, we're out in our safeties. They spent 2-3 years ago a ton of money on guys. They just bailed on them.
But they got to pay the wide receiver, right? And then the other wide receiver next year in Burrow. I mean, they got other guys to pay.
So what Cincinnati's making the same bet. We're going to have one expensive edge rusher we really like. We're going to move off other high-priced guys. Kansas City's done it. Rams are doing it. Now, these are all offensive coaches. Now, the Niners, of course, because they're not paying Purdy, they can have a Fred Warner.
Uniquely built, yeah.
Right. But it is interesting that when Kansas City moved off their corner.
Charvarius Ward.
And I'm like, whoa. I'm told that's a position of extreme importance. And they just moved off him. And they went and drafted guys, later round guys, and they were good. Not as good as him. And I was like, is that something beyond just an isolated move?
I think they had their Belichickian offseason where they pivoted off Tyreek and they had the extra first-round pick. And they kind of knew in the draft who they draft. McDuffie, the corner from who ironically got injured, and the kid Watson, the Washington State USC guy, was making plays at the end. McDuffie, he's a good player. He'll be fine once healthy. But the other thing, Colin, they drafted really well. that there is a cohesion with Veach and Andy that's kind of just like Belichick with Belichick, right? And those guys know each other really, really well. So it all starts a little bit like Brady with the guy at the top. I mean, their quarterback is just, I mean, he might just be an all-timer. I mean, he obviously already is, but I just mean this guy, when the dust settles, who knows? I mean, he could, why are they not going to win more? Right. I mean, when it's all said and done, is he a 4 or 5 Super Bowl guy? I know that's difficult. It's easy to say now, but he definitely has another one in him.
So it's interesting. So Pittsburgh spends a lot of money on defense. Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco did. But don't you think Telesco today regrets J.C. Jackson and maybe Khalil Mack?
100%. Khalil Mack, to me, pass rusher, I will lean pass rusher. I'm a big believer that you can get by on the edges of your defense at corner and safety, coach them up, and just dominate the front. Because if you get pressure and you go back to that Niner team in 19, and you look at this Eagle team, now they had good corners too, Darius Slay and stuff, but their front was, you and I could have played corner some games because they've got 3 or 4 double-digit sack guys coming from inside, coming from outside, because it's the one area in football where you can just cause havoc. I mean, if the Chiefs, I think they drafted Karlaftis, the kid last year from Purdue. I'm pretty sure they drafted another front guy. If they ever get like a 1B to Chris Jones, it might not matter who's playing the DBs because they would just overwhelm quarterbacks. And I think that's what Telesco tried with Khalil. I think Khalil probably just falls under a lot of wear and tear on that body. Not a speed guy, more of a power guy, and just, he probably regrets it, not in theory of trying to get a pass rusher, but that individual player.
So I watched McVay, Reed, and Zach Taylor move off defensive guys, yet the top defensive spends in the NFL, the teams that spend the most money: Chargers, Staley; Steelers, Tomlin; Seahawks, Pete Carroll; and Bills, Sean McDermott. I do believe when the defensive coach leans into the ear of the GM, I think Brandon Staley said, we need to get a corner. Asante Samuel's not it. And I look at Reed, I look at McVay, I look at Zach Taylor. And by the way, this year the Eagles let go of some of their defensive guys and don't want to let go of their offensive guys. I think general managers mostly control the draft, take the Patriots out. But I do think there's an influence. Often the coach and the GM are, Andy Reid and Brett Veach are different, but a lot of times they're both like 48 to 53 years old. They're the kind of guys you could see their wives go out. They go out for dinner. They crack beers on weekends, maybe occasionally golf.
A little more normal.
Yeah. But it's hard. Les Snead and McVay. McVay's in his ear. McVay's like Ramsey or a better number 2 receiver. Like, I get it.
Well, Colin, I just think it's the hierarchy of the owner. Is these coaches now make anywhere from 12. Sean McDermott just got a contract extension. That's not $7 million a year. I mean, he might be making $14-15 million. That's the going rate, right? So the GMs, they're doing well. Beside a couple of them, most of them probably making $2-3 million. So if you just look at it in any hierarchy, right? Who in any office setting has more juice? The guy making 3x the other guy. And just, I think the simple reality of this modern day football, GMs historically in all these sports, right, I think had more juice before the money. And now when you get a high price coach, if that guy wants something, he's simply going to get it. Now, some guys are easier to deal with and less probably passive's probably the wrong way to put it, but less just kind of Belichick run you over, I'm going to do my way or the highway, are willing to listen. But ultimately, it's their ass kind of on the firing line because they're on the sideline. And I just think more often than not, what they want, and a lot of times it comes from their assistant coaches, right? Their coordinators are pressing them, and that's kind of how it unravels. And sometimes the GM, and this stuff rarely gets out. I mean, you got to know a guy pretty well because that stuff gets out, then there becomes a lot of animosity, especially when it doesn't work. I just think the coaches now, they make so much money. They have so much pull with the guy that's signing the check. And, if they ever need to get anything signed off, they're going to lean with the coach.
Yeah, I've heard Sean McVay's gotten more and more power since the Super Bowl. How
could he not? I mean, it's just right with how much they're paying him and how much success he's having. He's really the face of their franchise, isn't he?
So finally, give me a bad team that you think will be better this year. And the one I've thrown at is Carolina. I like Houston a little bit, but I don't know much about DeMeco Ryans. So Carolina put together a very expensive staff. Bryce Young is arguably outside of Derek Carr and maybe including Derek Carr, the best quarterback in division.
Yeah, he's better.
Frank Reich, if you go look at his best year with Luck, Phillip Rivers, and Wentz, he made all of them their most efficient. So he's a little bit of a quarterback whisperer. He's not going to give you bigger numbers, but Phillip Rivers was more efficient. Luck, who could be turnover prone, more efficient. Wentz, turnover prone, 27 TDs, 7 picks. They let go. They went and got Adam Thielen to replace DJ Moore, which is there's a gap there. But they do have some money. Wouldn't be shocked if they sniffed around Dalvin Cook. And my takeaway, bad division, good staff. Bryce Young's, nobody has film on Bryce Young as an NFL quarterback. I look at their schedule. There's a lot of home games they can win. Carolina's my bad team. And for the record, John, good front seven. Some good young corners that were banged up. Like, they have defensive pressure on that front seven. Carolina's my team that will surprise people, double their wins. What say you?
I don't hate that. I mean, best coach in the division by far when you look around at the resumes. I'm not going to go with the Raiders. One team that I do think is talented, and when you watched them play last, they beat the Eagles early on in the season. The Washington football team Commanders, whatever the hell their name is, do have a lot of talent at different positions. Now, they're going with Sam Howell, who's a 5th-round pick, which on the surface sounds pretty crazy anytime you start a 5th-round pick that's never really played. But it wasn't that long ago. He was pretty highly touted as a college player. Now, the other curveball is Eric Bieniemy, which, everyone's got a different opinion. We're going to find out, because if Sam Howell's good and Washington is a double-digit win team, he's going to be a head coach pretty quickly, right? But they have defensive linemen. They have offensive weaponry. Now, their head coach, Ron, for a guy that's been employed for a long time, he doesn't win that much. But I do think they have a lot of talent on their team. And look at the division. The Giants, I think Brian Daboll did an incredible job, but their team is not that talented. I mean, it's just not. And the Cowboys, at any moment, shit just can get weird, right? They're better than Washington. I'm not arguing that. But it's just the Cowboys just can always just blow up because Jerry says something weird, right?
Mike McCarthy, conservative. Brian Schottenheimer, uber conservative. No Zeke, Pollard off an injury, and they have stated, we want to run the ball. It's like, guys, turn the page.
For sure. And the Eagles are absolutely stacked, and it feels insane to think that they're not going to be a 15-16 win team. But last year they kind of got to have a chip on their shoulder and prove. Now everyone's going to anoint them as just the clear favorite, and they are roster-wise right there with the 49ers. But I could see them maybe coasting some games that maybe they wouldn't have last year. And instead of winning 15 games, they win 12, right? So you have the opportunity. There's 7 playoff teams now, right? Because you get that extra. Look at last year. The Lions and the Packers and Seattle were getting in barely over 500. So if you can get to 9, 10 wins. Now, Washington, I think, had 7 or 8 wins, so they wouldn't double their win total. But it wouldn't shock me if the kid is just capable, and Bieniemy is taking pretty good notes. He's had a front row seat around Andy Reid for a decade, right? So that they could be, they got the pieces on the team on both sides of the ball. I think they could be a 10-win team.
I don't think it's crazy. Philadelphia, as good as they are, look at their schedule, week 4 to week 10.
I heard you talking about that.
Niners at Kansas City, cross country to Seattle, Buffalo, Rams. It is a lot of tough games.
A lot of pressure too. Sirianni lost both coordinators. He's not the offensive play caller. So there, Brian Johnson, the former Utah quarterback, who we've been talking about him at different places for years. I mean, he has a long resume, but he's calling the plays now, right? It's not when someone leaves the Ram staff or the Niner staff, right? You still know McVay's calling the plays, or Kyle's calling the plays, or Andy can call the plays. That's not the case. So that is a dramatic shift of an offensive play caller, even if their defense improves a little bit, because it had its moments where statistically, like stats wise, sacks and turnovers, they were good. But when you watched them, there were definitely some hole. I mean, Andy took advantage of it. So maybe they're a little better on defense, but offensively, it's hard to be as good as they were last year. I mean, you turned them on at any moment, they could score 30 points and a half, and it wouldn't even feel like it wouldn't be fair.
Yeah, they're facing more elite quarterbacks this year. They're just facing more Mahomes, Allen, Stafford. I think they may have Herbert on there. Yeah, they do. They have Russell Wilson now with Peyton. So I mean, the way the league works, if you play 8 to 10 Pro Bowl level quarterbacks, you're not winning 13 games. You're not winning 12 games.
Is there any circumstance that you would pick the Jets to make the playoffs?
Yeah, Tua gets hurt. Yeah, I think it's that simple. I think
Which
Tua
happens.
put on. Yeah, and I saw some video of Tua about 3 weeks ago. He's obviously put on 10 pounds minimum. Yeah. So, and he's practicing with a jiu-jitsu instructor how to fall, how to be sacked. So, I think the Jets will be fine. I don't think they'll be great. Aaron's never had a bad O-line, and outside of Elijah Vera Tucker, they got a rookie center, questions at left, Dwayne Brown. They're going to move Becton to right. They have a mediocre, other guard. It's a pretty average offensive line in a division. Belichick creates pressure. Bradley Chubb, Miami, and the Bills front.
Fangio.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of places I like him, but Aaron's never really been rushed in a pocket in his career. Green Bay did a remarkable job to have top 7 offensive lines and never draft O-lineman in the first round, often not in the second.
Well, think about this too. Aaron's had, because the Packers only hire offensive coaches, he's never had a defensive coach. So that offense, McCarthy gave up play calling at different times during his tenure, but you were directly dealing with the head coach. Now the head coach, Aaron's in charge of that offense, right, moving forward. So if Nate Hackett is a little overwhelmed and the pressure in New York, I think it could get weird fast. I do think they have a lot of talent, and if he does have the chip on his shoulder, I mean, it was not that far removed from playing some of the best football of his career, winning back-to-back MVPs. Now, Devontae Adams, they had a much more stable operation going. Division was shittier in the NFC North. But I do think there's, the Bills, are they just going to rattle off the East every single year? Things getting a little weird. The Patriots clearly aren't as talented, but Bills, they could have a shitty team and they win 8 games, right? 7, 8 games, so they're tough. And the Dolphins, you're right, they're a big wild card because they have high-end players. Their head coach is a good play caller, and Fangio is, one of the best defensive coordinators in the league.
Maybe the best, yeah. John Middlekauff, 3 and out. As always, the former scout for the Eagles joining us. Great seeing you, buddy.
Happy 4th, Colin.